only is it an honor to have you here at CBST, an honor to have the both of you sitting together on this most curious of Jewish evenings, but also I think the other side is, I imagine what might become obvious in the next hour is why there's something not so unique at all and actually quite obvious about your connection to one another, to our people, and to transformation in the world. We've agreed that instead of me reading off of bios or saying something like this, that Rabbi Buchdahl and Rabbi Moskowitz will tell us a little something about their meeting story this evening, and I'll just, for now, end with the Hoshana Rabbah words of Kol Mevaser Mevaser Ve'omer. May it be that we hear lots of possibilities for redemption and heralding of a better and better world in this year, that we really need it. And there will be index cards around the room. We're going to moderate questions, and for those of you on Zoom, please just put the questions into the Zoom chat to me, and I'll be moderating them from there as well. Rabbis.
Do you want to go first?
I'm happy to follow your lead.
Okay. I'm embarrassed to say that I've never been in this sanctuary, this beautiful sanctuary before, and I'm really honored to be here. I said downstairs that as I greeted my teacher, Joyce Rosenzweig, that the last time I was here was when I was in cantorial school, and I got to do a guest cantorial gig, and it was really amazing, and I got to sing with the choir, and it was just awesome. So, but then it took way too long for me to come back. So anyway, I'm so grateful that my dear friend, Rabbi Moskowitz, invited me for this, really for the honor of being able to be in conversation with you on this incredible book that you've put out into the world. Your fifth since the 5 years I met you, which is also just astonishing. But in particular, this book feels like it embodies maybe the deepest teaching that I've learned from Rabbi Moskowitz, which is what it really means to be a true ally and to be in it as actually a theological calling. And it could be embodied in our first meeting story, which is that we are in a group, I think we're still a group, the 7th cohort of the Hartman Rabbinic Leadership Intensive Group, and another one of our colleagues is here also, Rabbi Annie Lewis. And we're a group of about 25 rabbis from across the denominational spectrum, and our class, I think, had the distinction of being the first cohort in 7 cohorts that had, I think, more women than men in the cohort, which was unusual. It used to be just like 1 or 2 women in the group. Anyway, the first day, it happened to be that the women of the wall were meeting in Jerusalem at something like 6 in the morning for a special monthly minyan that they do for Rosh Chodesh. And it had been a long time since I'd gone, so I just put out there, I was like, I'm going to go tomorrow. Does anyone else want to go? And a handful of other women wanted to join. And Mike was the only man who said, I'll go as well, as like an ally. And I remember that already got my eyebrows up. And, and I said, well, you know, it is women at the wall, but great, come with us. And he woke up very early, and I had the joy of walking with Mike to the kotel. And I really got to understand, oh, this is not just like a thing. This is not just a showing up to share that I'm really good at this. This was like a deep calling of his to bear witness and to be part of this with us. And I'll let him tell another story from that experience. But just to say that was only just the beginning of my understanding of how deep Rabbi Moskowitz's sense of being present and showing up and being an ally for people. And I can't tell you like how much it has meant for me also as a person who, I'll just share more personally, that as a person who grew up with a non-Jewish mother and looking as I did in the Jewish community, I think that one of the things that always made me feel the most inauthentic was being in the presence of Orthodox Jews and Orthodox rabbis. That's my own Achilles heel, or a sense of, sensitivity. And so in particular, really feeling the deep friendship and respect that I think that we have shared over the last 5 years has done so much more for me than just feeling like I've found a teacher and a friend. But it's been really very deeply powerful for me to have Rabbi Moskowitz as my ally. So I just want to say it's an honor to be here.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. One quick funny story from that exchange. For those who have been to the Kotel, it's separated by gender. And I'm in the men's section, and I hear this young Haredi boy, this ultra-Orthodox young boy, who really came, I think, as a spectator to the event in order to protest. And I guess if you don't have the internet, that's fun. There's really there's a limited amount of ways of getting out, and this was his outlet. And so I hear him scream out, "Kofrim, kofrim," which is the Hebrew word for heretic. But because Hebrew is gendered, I felt like maybe it was my role to at least correct the gender. So I said, "Slicha, ulai kofrot, kofrot," right? Maybe these are female heretics, not male heretics. And he thought for a second, was like, "Kofrot, kofrot," and really inspired me that change was possible. Yeah. It's deeply nourishing on a personal level to be able to be exposed to and to gain proximity to the lived experiences of others. And in the mirror, or in Lakewood and BMG, nobody is thinking about Jewish identity, of like, do I code, do I speak, do I present, am I Jewish enough? It's not a thing. And I think our first go-around of the icebreakers at Hartman, there was an invitation to kind of share initial responses. Like, what's your kind of first feeling of like what this space is for you? And I remember observing that this was the best smelling base medrash I'd ever been in. And again, it was, for me as an optimist, something that gave me a lot of, I think, curiosity of like, wow, if this part could be better, what else have I been missing in this really very narrow space of lived experiences? And so one of the things that Allyship provides is this dynamic where a person is always gaining, receiving, and giving, and learning along the way. And so for me, I think Judaism sees allyship as less of a response to a brokenness in the world. There's voter suppression, so we'll figure out how to let people to the polls, and more about something proactive and preventative to restore the ideal way of being. That like, it's not about escaping how I can not be oppressed or how my friend cannot be oppressed, but rather there's a moral imperative to like remove oppression from the world because nobody should be oppressed. And for people who don't carry that weight of the oppression, they're often oblivious to it. Right? And so particularly when it comes to Jewish identity, nobody says to me, "Are you Jewish?" Right? Like, that's not a thing that right? In fact, unfortunately or fortunately, wherever I am, people are like, "Hey, do you know where like a minyan is?" Just yesterday I was in Cambridge and someone was like, "Hey, do you know where I can go for a yard site? I'm, for Yisker, I'm from Germany." So that's something that I've been really, I think, blessed to receive is the openness of people willing to share their vulnerabilities that I wouldn't necessarily intuit. Like, why would I be able to think that way? So thank you for always being authentic and genuine, and thank you for being my friend.
That's easy.
So, wow, that's a beautiful introduction from both of you. So now going beyond the aromas of the Beit Midrash, I wanted to start by each of you is a leader in Jewish communities, and each of you has been a part of Jewish communities, and I think lots of us in the room wear different hats in this way. So in your experience as participants and as leaders, when we get allyship wrong, what's keeping us from getting it right?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, you go first this time.
Fantastic, great. I think allyship is often awkward. Not infrequently, it's as aspirational as it is elusive. Not just because it's predicated on people being dehumanized and marginalized and the world being broken, but because it's so person-specific, what can be very affirming and validating and supporting to one person can actually be deeply offensive and even traumatic to another. And so I think there's that sense of like, it's just not worth it, right? And coupled with this sense of like, someone needs to grant me permission. Like, who told me it's okay to stand up for this person or to advocate? Maybe they don't want it. And because what it what society says it means to be an ally in a particular moment is changing so quickly. I remember one instance in particular where somebody wanted to share their pronouns for the first time. And they said, my preferred pronouns are. And there was like a moment in history where like that was the way in which it was framed. But this was the day after that, where somebody said, it's not a preference, like these are my pronouns. And the person was like, not worth it. Like I tried to do the right thing, but because it wasn't exactly the right way, they got canceled and they felt like. So I think that to answer the question like in a really short way, I think we get in the way of feeling like, who am I to do this? As opposed to feeling the moral imperative of like, I'm not okay with this existing in the world. I want to live in a different world. And I want to attach myself to this ideal way of being. And so like, it's not about you. Right? Which is like really one of the things that's interesting about allyship is that I believe each one of us is called, each one of us is put in this world. Hill famously says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Because nobody else is me. So each one of us at every single moment of our lives, there's an ask. And so we need to be in conversation with people. It needs to be done in the right way. And the closer we become, the more accurate we can, and precise and efficient we can be in the allyship. But this sense of like, that's not my fight to fight. What do you mean? The Torah was given, we have a tradition of wisdom of right and wrong. And it doesn't make a difference how right or how wrong. We need to attach ourselves to that way of being. So part of the intention of writing this is hopefully destigmatizing it. Even in Google, allyship comes up as being misspelled, right? It's like it's so new in that we don't have great language of what it means to be an ally, and particularly because Judaism has such a rich tradition and obsesses about language. This has been really a great way of kind of exploring the implications of the way in which we talk about things. Is actually a very easy way of both putting oneself out there as an ally and also contributing to the work of allyship.
So I'm going to learn that I should go first next time. Because when you talk to someone who's written the book on allyship, basically his answers are just, but I actually want to say more than the fact that you've written the book. This is your Torah of your life. And in particular, since you have taken this role, not just at CBST, but to be in some ways the main ally, not just for people who are queer, trans, gay, but in the larger Jewish world, but in so many ways you have become kind of the embodiment of one who understands what it is to be an ally. So, so his answers are deep and rich, and mine are going to be less thought through. But I will say that I think one of the mistakes, and this comes from my own personal learning and mistakes I've made myself, is so often we'll go into allyship with a sense that we're working on an issue together, like some kind of cause or some oppression that we're trying to fight. And I guess what I've realized is how much, and in some ways this is a less sophisticated way of saying what Rabbi Moskowitz said, that it really actually begins with the person in the relationship. And I think that we make the mistake when we don't start allyship with really the knowing of the other human being first. And that's not just because different people, even with the same issue, might need different things, but also because ultimately, if this is about some cause, you're actually ignoring the dignity and sanctity and divinity of the human being that's in front of you. And so I was thinking about the fact that I wanted to help lead an interfaith trip to Israel. And if I had started with, let's all go to Israel and be friends, I know it would have been really hard. And so I began by actually just getting to know some of my interfaith clergy colleagues, just as human beings, asking about why they got into it, what is their theology, who are their children? What is their life like? And so I made those kinds of relationships first, and then waited a year before we put this trip together. And then when I made the ask, I was able to ask some people who really didn't want to go on a trip to Israel, I would say. And one of them, in particular, some of my African American colleagues. And I remember that when we had our first meeting of the group that was going to go to Israel, this was all pre-October 7th. I worry that now I could never pull off a trip like this again. But that I remember we had a meeting, and one of my colleagues said, I have to say, I wasn't planning to go to Israel. When I think of Israel, I think of empire. She had a lot of things that she had a lot of problems with Israel, which I understood. And she said, but I'm going because I trust Angela. And that was just basically, that was the bottom line. And I thought to myself, this is what we have to begin with, is just actually knowing each other as human beings first. The allyship can come out of the sort of basic trust that we can build, just that I cared about her as a human being and she cares about me. So we're going to start with just that basic place, and we might disagree. And I think we make the mistake also then of like drawing lines, like if you cross this line, and there are, by the way, it's not like I have no lines. There have been things that have made me feel like I'm not sure. Oh, and I hope we don't go into that question. But, there are some things for which it becomes really difficult for me to stay, in allyship. But I think that it takes a lot for me to get to that place. Instead, I really try to stay in the conversation and stay with the relationship first. So that might be my.
Rabbi Moskowitz, can I push you a little bit on the young yeshiva bacher you met that morning at the Kotel? What happened in that moment when he said kofrot? Like, what, because I think there's as much as we're getting to laugh, there's a read of that story in which he saw people in a way that maybe he hadn't 10 seconds before.
So the Jewish tradition has very specific words to describe all sorts of things, and the Malbim famously says that there are no synonyms. So the word for cheshek, which can be translated as desire, is kind of a synonym for the word of chafetz, which also means to desire. The difference is that the word chafetz also is the word for object. And so there's like a deep objectification of certain types of desires, and particularly the Goy in the Vilna Gaon from Elio Kramer, died in 1797. And Vilna points out that in the context of violence against women in the Torah, the word chafetz is used by Dinah, by the Isha Yifastar, the woman of beautiful appearance, when they go out to war, and also in the story of Esther. And so when a person's desire, whether it's hate or love, is not in that place of yearning to come close, whether it's to truth or to another person, it's an act of desanctification because the person is no longer a person. The person now is the object. The desires are the object of hate. And so in that moment, you became the object of this person's hate. And you don't have a pulse. You don't have a name. You don't have feelings. You don't have a backstory. You're actually, you as a human don't exist. And the opposite is also true, right? When someone gets to know you. One of the verses that we learned together actually in Hartman is when Joseph's brothers see him from afar and seek to kill him. That from a distance, it's much easier to dehumanize somebody, right? So I think in that moment, in general, when people pause to think about things, I think it's very helpful. And when a person realizes that they're wrong, right? Because if you're wrong about something maybe even insignificant, maybe you're wrong about other things which are really significant. So the idea that this isn't a generic hate in a way that's not specific, but now it at least has a gender that's appropriate. Like, I think it's a step in recognizing that these people are people. And so if you disagree, then you can argue in the world of ideas. Who should sit where and who should read from the Torah? Like, we can have that conversation. And it's one of the things that's, I think, actually very interesting at the intersection of the trans experience in Jewish law. There are certain things which are essential about gender. If men and women are exactly the same, there's no place to transition. So there needs to be something that's different. Judaism traditionally is a gender-based spiritual practice. Is getting called up to the Torah something that reflects the essential nature of gender? Or, as it says in the Code of Jewish Law, it's a social construction. It's about kavod tzibor, right? Which means a community can say, it feels to me not great if men don't know how to make this blessing, and then we have to now call up women, right? But that has nothing to do with men and women. It has to do with literacy and a social construction, right? So really being able to think about, like, who's the right person in this moment is like a very helpful process, and developing that skill set of being discerning and questioning one's own givens and prejudices, I think, is essential for life. So I don't know where this kid is now, but hopefully they're closer to that space of seeing the humanity, and by humanity I mean, the divinity in human beings.
What have you each learned about how to show up as an ally for people who have shown up as allies for you?
It sounds so basic, but I continue to be reminded of this, and whether it's it's about allyship or showing up for people in their joy or in their grief. The first thing is literally just the showing up. That it matters so much that people just check in, actually just come in moments. That presence means everything. I was thinking about this a lot, like post October 7th. kind of like really remember the people who reached out to me, and especially the ones who were not from my community, but the ones who made a point of calling me or making an email. You know, not just in tragedies, but I think about the clergy who showed up after Pittsburgh and the ones who showed up after Colleyville and actually came to my synagogue just to say, we're with you, we're standing with you. And it really makes such a tremendous impact when people do that. And you also really notice when there's sort of deafening silence and that absence of presence that is there. So I think that has been one of the things that has been really deeply important. I think also recognizing that we often think of someone's moral character as a very fixed kind of thing. These are people who think this or do this. And actually, you know, the more we study about moral character, and I also think the way that Judaism views this as well, is that it's actually much less permanent than that. And I think that that's a really important lesson for us, especially when we're thinking about people that we have decided we sort of have written off for one reason or another, or we've decided are kind of in the good category, the bad category. We want to kind of categorize our friends and our enemies. And I guess one of the things that I've always really been struck by is, you know, I have had this saying that my predecessor taught me, which was like, you keep your friends close and you keep your enemies closer. And I guess I say that in that, like, there have been people, the people who've been sometimes my biggest critics, when I have reached out to them to really have the conversation, let me really get curious about what you're really mad about. Some of them have turned into like my biggest supporters, my deepest allies. So I guess not to categorize people as permanently in one camp or another, or of one kind of character or another. There's a lot more room for people to kind of change and evolve and change. That's my kind of eternally hopeful sort of view, but I've also seen it happen over and over again if we're also open to continually show up in that relationship.
Beautiful. In response to October 7th, there were a lot of people who really felt betrayed by the silence, that the people that we marched for and with, and like they just weren't there. Yeah. And some of them, they weren't, not only were they not there to support us, but they were actually in opposition. And one of the important truths about allyship is that it's not transactional. We don't support you on the condition that then you're going to come and support us. Right. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We say in the Mishaberach on Shabbos, for all those people who are engaged in volunteering with faith. Because if the motivation isn't faith, you're just going to be disappointed, right? If you're doing it for a thank you note, like you're in the wrong profession. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I think, for me, faith provides, is the confidence, and maybe too much confidence, that I'm going to do what I think is the right thing to do. And like wherever I end up, that will be the right place to end up. Because it's not actually by any means necessary. Like that is a really horrific framing of goodness and truth, because the way in which we do things matters a lot. In fact, the way in which we do things will determine what gets done. And so one of the things that I've learned from folks is, beyond like the deep listening that's necessary, is that there's a learning curve. I remember, and Seth Martin, who's here, could tell stories of my eagerness and my excitement to try to get this right. And I write about this in some of the essays, that there's a darkness after the dawn, right? That the redemption happens slowly, and it's not linear, right? There's a way in which there's still brokenness when other things get fixed. And so you can have a person who like wants to be the ally and is so overwhelmed, almost incapacitated with the egregiousness of the world, that they're just like, okay, enough already. Like I've had enough. Let's just fix it once and for all. And that's not how the world works. And so for people who want to try to get there, that desire and that intention is really important. But there needs to be compassion internally and externally about the time and the learning curve to actually make the impact. And it's one of the things that I even just heard from Rabbi Klein earlier. He was speaking with students at Brown, and evidently one of them had heard me someplace else and like made an impact. And I couldn't even remember where the speech was that it would have been. But we don't know the impact of often there are words like microaggressions in the world. But there's something called a micro-affection. We don't know the impact of smiling, holding a door, making eye contact. To strangers, particularly to strangers. And I think it's one of the things that we need to expand the language of what does it mean to elevate the humanity of a human that we don't know in passing. I see you as a human, I see you as a human, I see the divine in you. So listening is really important, having faith is really important, but also realizing like this is not about showing up in a particular moment as much as it's about an attitude about how we move about the world, with a consciousness, with an awareness of I'm here to help the world get to its place of idealism the ideal way that God wants us to live our life. And so it's a process, and you can't do it alone, and we can't do it without people supporting us. And so it's there's a lot to learn. There's a lot more to write about it, but I hope that this is the beginning of the conversations that we have internally, that if we're here, then we have the ability to make a difference. And like in Judaism, the words that we use for piety and righteousness are the same words that we have for justice and kindness. Chesed and chesed, tzaddik and tzedek, right? We can be amateur good doers, or we can be like deep practitioners and artisans that really hone the craft of being agents of good change in the world. And like that's how we are as humans in the world. Wherever we are the mastery of looking at opportunities and creating change.
Beautiful. I'm so struck when you talk about what I felt from the first conversation we had, the very first conversation. I was like, oh, he's a true believer. And what I mean by that, and it seems so silly that as a rabbi that I would even say that, but you'd be surprised how many rabbis are not, actually. And what I mean by that is not that we, each of us have our own conception of God, whatever, and I actually think of myself as a pretty God-centered person, but Rabbi Moskowitz really, and you embody that with the beginning of your answer, which I think is so key, that it's like, it's not about, allyship is not about like, then they'll be there for us. And I hear that language way too much, and it embarrasses me. Oh, but we, Jews always showed up for all these folks, and now they're not showing up for us. And I was like, is that why we did it? But really from this very deep place that it's both about feeling that this is your obligation to God, but also that it is your obligation to the godliness in every human being that you even meet. And I think that is, it just really so comes through in everything you do. And I feel badly that we're not talking more specifically about the book, but I think the book, you'll all hopefully get your copy before you leave here today, and get Rabbi Moskowitz to sign it. But it's beautifully set up so that it's done by Parshiot. So it's so Torah-based. It's deeply theological. And I think that it's, if nothing else, just read it as a meditation each week with each parsha. We're just starting with Bereshit this week. It's perfect to start right now with that. But it is, it's anyway, deeply godly and beautiful.
Well, we appreciate each of you being able to do this the week of Bereshit. We appreciate Rabbi Werber writing her beautiful introduction. I mean, just because the Ariel and Renee and the various forces that came together to bring us together in the week of Bereshit, and it's exciting to be able to have this Torah commentary really for this cycle right at this moment. Well, why don't we just take a minute and dig in, and then I've got a couple of questions here, and if others have questions, you can, again, in the room, you can pass them to me on index cards. Earlier today, Rabbi Moskowitz, I confess that I was asked what my favorite Hebrew letter was. And without batting an eyelash, as I think a couple of our colleagues can attest to, I said Sadi. And I couldn't help but think whether I maybe a little bit had been influenced by some of our recent conversations. I've always had a thing for Sadi, I have to say. But maybe just to give people maybe who are newer to your Torah a little sense, if you could tell me why you might like the letter Tzadi, and maybe in doing so we could get a little taste, as Rabbi Buchdahl said, of some of the Torah that you're teaching in this book.
Thank you. The word Tzadi is often pronounced tzaddik, and it's understood in the rabbinic tradition as a placeholder for the righteous. But one of the things that I think is less known is that the idea of being righteous in the Jewish tradition is not about being perfect or batting 1,000. It's about being willing to throw oneself back into the fight, about not giving up. It's actually about the struggle. We're called, Jacob gets his name Israel, Yisrael, after struggling with the divine and overcoming. We're not called B'nai Tuchal, the children of overcoming. We're called B'nai Yisrael, the children of the struggle. And so the verse says that Shiva Yipol Tzadik V'Kam, the righteous falls 7 times and then gets back up. Because it's actually much easier to fail a test than it is to pass a test. And after a person fell 7 times, they say, no, but I want to be better. I want to be good. I'm not done. That itself defines the righteousness. And this is what the prophet says, Tzadik be'emunasa yichya, that the righteous live with faith. The simple interpretation is that righteous people live with faith. The Nesiv Shalom, the Slumber Rebbe, Zatzal says that no, that a person can fall 7 times, get back up, and live with the faith that they're still called a tzaddik, even though they're 0 for 7. right? And as somebody who like doesn't do most things well, doesn't do most things better than most, doesn't do things as well as the bottom half of the world, I find, and this is, I mean, there's a lot of Torah on this. We make the bracha la'asik b'divrei Torah, to toil. It's about the effort. Judaism is an effort-based, not product-based. It's not about the finished product. It's about the effort that we put in, and that way we're all judged the same. How much effort? How much commitment? So, to answer your question, the letter tzaddik, if you can imagine, there's a nun that's falling. I won't isolate the yud, but the yud here in the middle, the tzad is actually two letters. The nun represents nefila, falling, which is why in the alphabetical acrostic of Ashrei there's no nun. The yud is the yid, it's the neshama, it's the divine. And so in this embodied state, there's tension between the body and the soul, each wanting to go back to its source. The tzaddik represents this struggle of the nun, of the falling of the body, saying, yeah, but I'm hungry, I'm tired, I just want about me. And the yud saying, no, 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 all those things are here for some sort of greater good. And so the tzaddik is the one who says, okay, it's a struggle, the world's broken. I don't want this world, I want a new world. But I'm here, and I'm here to make it the world that I think that God intended. And so that's what it means, I think, to me, to aspire to be a tzaddik, is somebody who doesn't give up. Particularly when it's difficult, particularly when it's disappointing, to say, okay, so like it didn't work when I reached out to this person. It didn't work when I advocated for this candidate. It didn't work, but okay, but it's not over. I'm still here. As long as I'm here, then there's an ask.
It's not a complete Rabbi Moskowitz teaching if you don't also tell us about the gematria.
Sure. So, just to say this, and maybe Rabbi can add more. I'm good with numbers that you can use your fingers for. So the word that we use for ally is the word chaver. It's like the Latin to bind, to attach. It's a language of attachment. The numerical value of the word chaver is 210. 210 is really significant in that we are enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. The word that's described of us going there is radu, to go down. The word for generation, there are not 210 gematrias in the book, but it's close. And in every essay I try to show, and in the introduction I explain more about the role of gematrias. The book is really about connections and expanding our capacity to connect. And numerology within the Jewish tradition is really about showing a connection to two things which seem to be disconnected, but through the shared number to show that they're related. So just maybe one last one. There's an anagram. The word Shemos for Exodus, the beginning of the 5 books, has 210 letters in the first paragraph. And seen through this lens where the churban, the destruction, is the natural consequence of a lack of chabura, a lack of cohesiveness. The story of the Exodus, as a result of the brothers selling Joseph, enslaving him, then there being a famine and us having to go there and settle because he's there, is ultimately about a story of us being liberated from a land that we never should have ended up in, to be able to learn a lesson that we should have known before we ever got there. And part of the message of allyship is that it's actually preventative. Had Joseph been treated like a brother, none of this would have happened, right? The second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, sinas chinam. The first temple was destroyed for the 3 cardinal sins of idolatry, adultery, and murder. For that we got 70 years. And now we're almost 2,000 years. So it doesn't feel like it was a good deal. But if we see it not as a punishment, but of a consequence, until we can love each other as family, then we can't co-occupy spaces in a house. And so really recognizing that the role of learning the stories in the weekly Torah portion is about being guided into the way in which we interact with people as a way of connecting to the divine.
Beautiful.
Thank you. One question we have, knowing that each of you has had the opportunity to speak and teach in many venues, is can you share a time where you've taught, and perhaps a larger group, perhaps you have the experience of someone heckling you or something along those lines, an invited talk. What do you say? What do you do? How do you approach that moment in terms of your own character, in terms of how you teach moving forward? Do you teach? The person here has asked a question. Do you provide more psukim or mishnayos, like to teach about that very moment?
Do you want to?
I have to think about. I mean, I guess I have enough of a. I don't operate in a more political sphere as much as I'm in a more spiritual sphere. So I have not had the experience where I have been publicly heckled in the middle of a talk. So I've never had to really deal with that experience. But I get plenty of emails, phone calls, Rabbi, I was really unhappy with what you've said, or I'm, you know, I got a bunch of emails after this set of high holidays, and I think that, I mean, so I always start with the place of like, where is this anger, where is this pain, where is it rooted, and and begin with the curiosity of that, and actually really like not to ignore it, and to try to start asking the questions that help me understand that. And so I have found that sometimes, you know, I'm not going to be able to say what makes them happy, but sometimes it's just really hearing what it is that is so deeply upsetting to them that is enough. And it's not about bringing more Torah. It's really more about actually understanding and hearing their story and knowing them and feeling like their rabbi has heard them. I think that has been my experience when I have people who are very upset.
Yeah, absolutely. Homophobia was not brought to the world because of a verse, right? Transphobia is not about a pasuk that if you could just show someone how it's seen in the context of Jewish thought, that not only is there not a biblical prohibition for trans folks to wear misgendered clothing, but there might be a biblical obligation, right, to wear gender-affirming clothing, right? That if the only pasuk, the only verse in the entire Hebrew Bible you care about is the one in Leviticus, like maybe it's not about verses, maybe it's just about homophobia. So,
Amen.
But it is one of the, and I talk about this because it happens not infrequently in interfaith places where somebody will say, like, Rabbi, but like, what do you do with this verse? And I'll say to the imam or to the priest, like, with all due respect, like, what do you do with every other verse in the entire Hebrew Bible, right? Like, we don't eat the same foods. We don't
stone our children.
We don't stone our children. We don't keep the Sabbath on the same day, right? Like, the only thing that you think is kind of tethered to the Old Testament is this one verse, and it's like super bizarre. So there's some,
very literally, yeah.
Yeah. So I think at Jerusalem Pride last summer, I spoke about the hypocrisy of hate. It's one of the easy ways of identifying like whether or not something is rooted in hate. So like how consistent is the principle? For example, in Texas, if you don't want the government to be involved in your life, of like how many guns or where you go to school or who you can, all those things, but you want to invite them into your child's bedroom and not give parents like the ability to like have medical
or their uterus
or all these places, right? So then like it's actually not about the government at all. It's about your misogyny or whatever it is. So I think that's helpful to be able to speak to people. But I don't get heckled so much. But certainly early on there was a lot of hate mail. Even now there are people who will show up if I'm lecturing somewhere to be in the opposition. I think if people want the same things, then we can disagree about how to get there. You can have conversations about how do we end gun violence. But if somebody's like, look, I just think there needs to be a certain number of school shootings every year in order that I can carry a gun, like we can't have the same conversation. We don't want the same things, right? Yeah. So, do you want your straight friends to be forced to marry somebody who can't find them attractive because they're queer? Like, is that what you think the win looks like? Do you think that when God says it's not good to be alone, that like He only meant for straight people? What's the? So rarely do I think it's about the math of verses, and more it's about recognizing that the people who you think are other are actually so connected to you that you can't other them.
Thanks. How do you think gay Jews of liberal streams should show up in the Orthodox world as allies to LGBT Jews there?
It's a good question. I mean, I think one way to kind of ask the question is like, what's the need of Orthodox Jews in the broader space? I don't think it's necessarily around school vouchers. Like, I don't think that's the ask. I think the working mechanisms of allyship are really consistent in that people want to be understood. To be seen as not caring about anybody else. The prejudices that people assume. I was actually just speaking to a colleague of ours from Hartman on the West Coast who spoke about in her high holiday drasha what it meant to come into a room at Hartman to see me and to feel like, this guy's not going to want to touch me and I can't say that, like all these like prejudices. And so we don't want to be judged or to be marginalized of like, oh, that's not real Judaism, ironically, or to feel that that we're not human and people also. So I think just the not being afraid of and being curious. One of my kids wrote in their college essay that they were kind of raised in a cult, and I feel like that's their story, and it's not they're the main character in their own narrative. But it's also reinforcing a particular narrative that I don't think does anything to bring us together and reinforces those separations. So I think the ultimate ask is there's no one way to be a Jew the way there's no one way to be a person, and we need each other. Like there's no extra letters in the Sefer Torah, there are no extra people in the world. It's like the biggest truth that we have. God doesn't put extra people in the world. And and therefore nobody should be excluded as being non-essential.
So maybe we can broaden that, and really for both of you, how can liberal, progressive identified Jews, traditional, maybe Orthodox identified Jews be allies for one another in general, just as Jews?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has been the silver linings, I feel like, of this last year, which has been so deeply painful in so many ways, is, I'm not a big believer in kind of like finding commonality because we've got this common enemy, but there has been a certain understanding that actually we really need each other in a very different way this year, which has actually brought some very beautiful blessings into my life, and I think, and into our community's life in a way. I think that some of these boundaries, like I was very happy that like as a New York City community, we all kind of did a big commemoration of October 7th together, and was absolutely everyone there, I don't know, but the fact that people were able to kind of come together across a lot of denominational lines was just a really wonderful thing to see. I'll share that, like, I went on a mission to Israel with a bunch of different rabbis, and there were many of those rabbis were rabbis that their synagogue is within a mile of my synagogue, and I'd never met them before. And this was sort of the reason we were coming together. And I developed some relationships with a few of them, including one Orthodox rabbi who then made a point of inviting me when Naftali Bennett came to his synagogue, and he's like, "I'm having this VIP reception, and I'd really like for you to come." And I was sort of like, he wants his female Reform colleague to show up to his Orthodox synagogue when this Israeli former prime minister is there. I was like, I will be there. And I didn't really care about meeting Naftali Bennett. It was about being in relationship with him. And I don't think that invitation would have come before this year. And Naftali Bennett meets me, and we had never met before, and my colleague introduces me to him, and he's kind of very curious about the fact that we're friends at all, and so asks a bunch of questions, and then he proceeds to begin his talk at the Jewish Center in front of this Orthodox congregation, and says, "You know what? This is what Israel can learn from American Judaism. About these kinds of relationships across these lines." He would never see an Orthodox rabbi, I think, in Israel, actually, like from the Rabbanut, like invite a female or Reform colleague and call her rabbi in that moment. So anyway, it just was like, I think that we are very much in. There's the opportunity that comes out of the crisis, I think, in all these moments, and I think that that's what we need to be more for each other. And I think that this was a question that was originally on your thing, and I was thinking about this, which is just that I've walked through the world, at least the Jewish world, for most of my life. I always felt like I was very visibly the stranger within the Jewish community. I don't know that I can claim that quite in the same way anymore now that I'm, rabbi at Central Synagogue, but those scars from your early years, they don't really ever go away. And what was surprising for me was, as I got to actually know the stories of people that I started to serve as a rabbi, I would meet people who looked like all of you here, or who had very Jewish names and very Jewish faces, and I don't know, even went to day school. And they would tell me their story of why they felt like they were an outsider in the Jewish community for one reason or another. I probably don't need to explain that to a group of people who are at CBST. But But you don't have to be gay and Jewish to have had that experience either. And sometimes, I gave a talk about race a couple of years ago, a sermon on race, and I couldn't believe how many people came up to me and said, I know exactly how you feel because I'm a Southern Jew and I've lived here. And I was like, oh, really? You've experienced that? Or I can't tell you, I felt exactly the same as you because I grew up poor and the Jewish community felt like it was in an upper middle class, and I felt like an outsider. I mean, this is all just to explain that everyone has that story. Everyone feels in one context or another like they don't somehow belong. And I think that one of the things that I came to appreciate is that instead of feeling apologetic for that, I actually learned to embrace that was, first of all, maybe the locus of my empathy and maybe my resilience and my creativity. And then it hit me, oh, actually, no, this is the existential state of what it is to be a Jew. Jews are the stranger. Abraham and Sarah had to leave their home to become Ivrim. Ivrim literally means the one who crosses over. Jews are boundary crossers, and it's actually, you don't really know, you can't inhabit the depth of a Jewish soul without actually knowing what it feels like to be the stranger. So maybe one of the things that we can actually teach each other now is to see not just the divinity in each other, but the kind of the person who feels like I still feel on the outside sometimes. And when we can connect with that, we're connecting on some deep soul level that is the commons of the soul for all of us. And maybe also the most Jewish thing about all of us. And then we don't have to draw all those lines about whether or not you're halachic this or observant enough or whatever it is, because actually it comes down to something even much deeper than that. And that is, I think, the secret to our strength and goodness, empathy, creativity, resilience, and everything best about the Jewish soul.
Can I invite you both to Can I invite you both to get a little more into that? I mean, we talked, as we were corresponding before tonight, we talked about invisible identities, and particularly the ones that have been marginalized from disability to contacts with the criminal justice system. You started to talk about socioeconomic background, HIV status, chronic illness. I mean, I think you've started to talk about it, but maybe you could both elaborate a little bit on. It's one thing to walk into a room and somebody is wearing, I am this thing, or or has a kippah, or has skin looks different than someone else's skin, something like this. But how, when identities are more invisible, do we walk into a room and navigate that from the way that's the most? Well, you said it so beautifully. So.
I think that would have been my answer to that. I would just say that, I think Rabbi Moskowitz and I, more than many people, probably have a lot of presumptions made about us when we walk into a Jewish space. And I guess what it has probably done for both of us, though, I think probably why we actually seek out being allies a lot is because I think we know what it's like to be put into a box in one way or presumed something. And I actually think it is, for me, I think it is the locus for my ability to connect with others. That's been at the root of it. And not to presume anything, and also to recognize, if I just kind of come in with the presumption that there's something that is that is your sorrow, I just want to know you and love you for who you are. I don't know if that's sort of the starting point, then it kind of doesn't matter if it's visible or not, or it's invisible.
It feels like I think you've just, for me, reclaimed the word assumption. People have the whole thing about when you assume but this is a different kind of assuming that maybe we're assuming something about each other's vulnerability as a universalistic Jewish or human experience. It's really, we're kind of really not making asses out of one another, but doing the opposite in a way. Rabbi Moskowitz.
I think tradition teaches the most pronounced identity of any human being is that of being created in the image of the divine. We are so much more similar than we are different. And I think Judaism also kind of frames intimacy as an invitation. One of the things that we do here and really all over the Jewish world, Friday night, regardless of our gender identity or sexual orientation, we turn around to the Shabbos bride and we say hey, I'm interested, right? And then we wait for, right? And we wait for the enthusiastic consent of the Shabbos bride to come in.
Nice.
Thank you. Completely parenthetically, there is actually an arc of gender. I think Seth and I actually wrote about this, yeah? Friday night, we say Vaynuchu Va, God dwells in her, the Jewish people. Shabbos morning, it's Vaynuchu Vai, God dwells in him, the Jewish people. By Mincha, it's Vaynuchu Vam, God dwells in them, the Jewish people. Without getting too into it, the placement of the challah, Friday night, Shabbos day, actually reflects those gender identities. Okay. And when I think about an interaction with a person, that sharing of oneself is actually a really intimate act. Like, you want to tell me about yourself, like you are becoming vulnerable, you're exposing oneself. It's actually why we keep the Torah, which is so precious, wrapped up, and then it's behind the curtain, and behind the curtain, right, there's all of these things because it's so precious, the part of us that makes us unique. So to share that with another, there's something, Seth knows who this is, because I think we're, for the book we did for Chaver Up, there's a man of trans experience. I think his husband just had a birthday today, if that helps give context. But he passes as a man, identifies as a man of trans experience. And we were doing the prep for a different book, and he saw on Zoom that I had my pronouns shared by my name. And he said to me, I should probably share my pronouns as well, but I actually had some really painful and expensive surgeries in order that I shouldn't have to tell you what my pronouns are. Like, that's why I transitioned, so that I shouldn't have to tell you, right? And we and our experiences are much more expansive than the words that we can use to describe them. Like, who you are, right? It's one of the reasons why talking about stuff is so helpful, because it was horrific, it was only traumatic, right? So there's actually a deep injustice, right? And it contributes to the erasure of the expansiveness of a human and trying to say, like, I'm a person who this, or that, right? Even if we use person first and all of the things at the end, we are who we are. And that's actually what God models for us, right? When God says, I am who I am, right? This is, and the divine revelation is really much is God's, coming out speech, and we force God back into the closet with the erasure of God's identity as the infinite source of the universe through the golden calf. And I find that our tradition really gives us the ability to say, like, oh, this is relatable in that way. And so just like I don't really understand what that means for God to come out, I don't understand, like, why it was such a big deal to have this golden calf, but I understand, like, right, there are consequences. Like, I want to be a person who's out in the world as somebody who's here to attempt to aspire to help other people, and that itself is the invitation for other people to say, like, hey, actually, you did this thing that was hurtful, or this other person is, or what would be even more helpful is. So I think that's the best that we can do, is to put out to the world that we're somebody who's here in a really deliberate way, really intentional way, to attempt to make the most positive change in the world. And hope that people reciprocate.
We have just a few minutes, but perhaps there's something you'd like to ask one another before we finish up this evening. Or
So what's the next book? So I know there's another one coming in 6 months.
So my partner in life and living, Rabbi Ancestral, is here and has told me that there needs to be a mandatory waiting period of at least 5 days, right, between books. But what I would like to write next is a commentary to the Haggadah, because the story of liberation is ongoing. I think actually we just have a couple more days of saying for Sukkot David Hanlei Feles, and Hanlei Feles, the Sukkah of David that collapsed. It's not in past tense. Hanlei Feles means it's falling, right? The story of liberation is ongoing. We haven't been, and to me, Leil Seder. Anyone who's in my Haggadah class has heard this since Michael, but Seder means order. So Leil Seder is literally the night of order. It's the night of organizing. The Torah was given, it's the night of the ideal, right? In other words, we slaughter the angel of death in Chag Gadya because we've already gotten to that pace post all the stuff. This year we're here, but next year we're in Jerusalem. It's the same night as Tisha B'Av because, like, we're going to fix it. And that's why anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat, because how is this night different than all other nights? On other nights, like, if you're hungry, you can't come and eat. Like, it's the night of recognizing the reason why it's destroyed is because we goofed up, and now we got the memo. We're going to fix it. We're going to organize it. We're going to get it right. And so I think, like, for me, living in that space of recognizing that if we don't want the temple to be destroyed again this year, we need to fix the reason why it was destroyed. So, like, that to me exists in the night of the ideal, the Leil Seder, the night of order. Also, we know the Torah is given on 4 different levels: the Pshat, the Remes, the Drush, and the Sod, the simple, the illusions, the homiletic, and the mystical. So on the night of Passover, there is no Pshat. There is no simple interpretation, right? Matzah is flour and water, right? That's the Pshat of Matzah. In that superficial space of the external, it's this to the exclusion of that. But if you remove that, you can go below the surface. So it's the bread of liberation and the bread of poverty. And everything it's the libations, but it's also the blood. We're dipping in all the things, but it's also the salt water. It's the bitter herbs, but it's also, like, everything has all of that there. And then if you reverse that order, that which is the most concealed, the soid, now becomes the beginning. And so the Seder is the soid, the drosh, and the remez in the reversed order, where Purim, which is where we conceal what's revealed, prepares us to reveal what's normally concealed. So for me, like, that's where it all exists. It's still, obviously, you can tell, very alive. It's weird to live, like, in a Erev Pesach way where, like, okay, I can have this chametz, which also contributes perhaps to some of my eating patterns, or shawarma and pizza. But, like, I'm excited about it. So, anyways, long answer. That, God willing, will be the next book.
That's great. I love it. It can leave you a little breathless sometimes. Well, I love it.
You're not the only one, yeah.
Rabbi Buchdahl, you had mentioned that you also have a book in progress. Do you want to give us a little preview of what to expect?
Okay. Well, maybe my answer about the stranger was a preview, but it's called The Heart of a Stranger, and it is a memoir that is really, if all, as my teacher Rabbi David Ellenson said, all theology is personal. So the memoir is really an opportunity to kind of, in some ways, share my not comprehensive theology. So it's essentially the story of, my life as a boundary crosser in many different places, being born in South Korea, being a woman in a very male profession, all these kind of boundary crossings I've had in my own life. And then, and each chapter has a little Devar Torah that's centered around a Hebrew word, which is an opportunity, and each one is thematically linked. It's an opportunity to kind of share these, I think the like nuggets of Judaism with the wider world, and it's going to be published. I have a non-Jewish editor and publishing, company that sees this as a way for non-Jews as well as Jews to learn something about Judaism. So I hope that that's what it'll be. Is like a sort of spiritual book from my perspective. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you to both of you for such a lovely evening. And thanks to the enthusiasm of this community to support this work, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. Rabbi Moskowitz will be available outside downstairs to do some book signings. Some more of his books are available. Rabbi Buchdahl, I hope we will be back. Maybe I'll come up to Central and.
I promise.
For
we
your,
had CBST. Someone reminded me that we had CBST at Central to sing many times. So.
Oh. We'd love to see you back there. And if people want a little fun fact, you could ask about what the colors of this book have to do with Hebrew numerology as well. Thanks, everyone.
The colors had numbers.